What if I told you that the greatest adventure novel of all time is not fiction, but a watered-down version of reality, which was far more terrifying? We are used to seeing Robinson Crusoe as a noble hermit in neat goatskins, who calmly settles into his new life. But the real-life prototype for this character went through hell that would have broken any modern person in a week. The story of Scottish sailor Alexander Selkirk is not a fairy tale about friendship with Friday, but a chronicle of a brutal struggle with madness, hunger, and absolute silence. It is an experiment on the human psyche, staged by fate itself on the backdrop of a remote Pacific island. Watch the video to the end, and you will learn what one single mistake in his calculations nearly cost him his life, and why salvation turned out to be harder for him than loneliness. Imagine the level of despair and stubbornness it takes for a person to voluntarily remain on an uninhabited piece of land in the middle of the ocean. Alexander Selkirk was not a shipwreck victim in the classic sense. No one threw him overboard by force. He was a navigator on the privateer ship Cinque Ports, and being an experienced sailor, understood that the rotten hull of the ship would not withstand further sailing. The conflict with Captain Stradling reached a boiling point, and Selkirk, in a fit of rage, demanded to be dropped off at the nearest island in the Juan Fernandez archipelago. He was sure that the crew would support his mutiny or that the captain would change his mind, but the boat with his belongings simply touched the sand and sailed back. The moment the oars hit the water, taking him away from the ship, his confidence instantly turned to panic. He shouted after them, begging them to take him back, but the captain just laughed, considering it an excellent lesson for the rebel. Selkirk was left standing knee-deep in water, watching the sails disappear, which were his last connection to civilization. All he had left was a chest of clothes, navigational instruments, a mess tin, a pound of tobacco, a flintlock rifle, and a Bible. This set of items became his only arsenal in the war against the wilderness, which was supposed to last a few weeks but dragged on for years. The first days on the island turned into a monotonous nightmare of fear and denial. He stayed close to the shore, staring at the horizon for hours, hoping to see the sail of a returning ship. The sound of the surf, which is usually soothing, sounded like an endless sentence here, reminding him of his complete isolation. The nights were filled with the frightening sounds of the jungle and the roar of sea lions, which seemed like monsters in the darkness. Selkirk slept fitfully, clutching his musket, even though there were no enemies on the island except those of his own imagination. Hunger became his first real enemy, forcing him to overcome his apathy and depression. The supplies left to him from the ship were negligible and ran out in the first few days. He had to collect shellfish on the shore, but even this process required effort that his fear-worn body did not have the resources for. He ate just enough to stay alive, unable to find the strength to hunt properly or search for better shelter. His whole world narrowed to a strip of beach in the horizon, which remained treacherously empty. It soon became clear that his grim predictions about the fate of the ship Cinque Ports had been prophetic. The ship did indeed sink shortly after leaving the archipelago, and almost the entire crew perished in the abyss. The few who survived were captured by the Spanish and rotted away in Peruvian prisons, becoming slaves. The irony of fate was that, left completely alone on the island, Selkirk turned out to be the only lucky one of the entire crew. But in those first weeks on the shore, he did not know this and cursed his choice every second. The sailor's psychological state rapidly deteriorated, pushing him to the brink of suicide. He often put a gun to his temple, thinking that a quick death was better than a slow decline into obscurity. The absence of human speech, familiar social rituals, and alcohol, to which sailors of that time were addicted, caused severe withdrawal symptoms. His mind, deprived of external stimuli, began to devour itself, giving rise to hallucinations and bouts of causeless terror. Only his instinct for self-preservation and perhaps a deeply hidden religiosity kept him from taking the fatal shot. Loneliness on Massa Tierra Island was not idyllic seclusion, but a cruel test of endurance. Although the island was rich in resources, it was in no hurry to give them to a man accustomed to taking everything by force or money. The laws of the maritime hierarchy did not apply here. There was no one to command and no one to report to. Selkirk had to completely rebuild his consciousness in order to transform himself from a hired worker of civilization into the master of his own destiny. Landing on the shore was only a prelude to the real trials that awaited him ahead. Nature had prepared tests for him that were impossible to pass relying solely on his maritime experience. I'm really interested to hear your thoughts. Do you think you could have coped with the despair of the first months of isolation on your own? Or would your sanity have succumbed to the silence? Let me know in the comments. Ready to learn the truth about who became Selkirk's main enemy in the first nights? It wasn't Spanish pirates or mythical monsters, but hordes of rats brought to the island by previous ships. As soon as Selkirk fell asleep, these rodents came out to hunt, attracted by the smell of a living human. They brazenly gnawed at his clothes and even tried to bite his legs and arms, turning every night into torture. The inability to sleep normally exhausted the sailor more than hunger and loneliness combined. The fight against the rodents seemed hopeless, as their population on the island was huge and uncontrolled. The usual methods of defense did not work, and it would be madness to waste precious gunpowder on shooting small pests. The rats felt their impunity and became increasingly aggressive, depriving Selkirk of his last refuge, sleep. He urgently needed a solution that did not depend on the limited resources brought from the ship. And here, nature itself suggested a solution based on biological balance. In addition to rats, the island was inhabited by feral cats, also left there by sailors in years past. These animals were cautious and did not approach humans, but they were natural enemies of rodents. Selkirk realized that his salvation lay in taming these small predators. He began to leave part of his prey for them, luring the cats to his camp with goat meat. The taming process required patience, which the former rebel had never shown before. Gradually, the cats got used to the presence of humans and realized that they could get easy food near him. They surrounded his hut with an invisible protective barrier that the rats no longer dared to cross. Soon, dozens of cats were sleeping next to him, warming him with their heat and protecting his peace. This symbiosis with animals was Selkirk's first step toward restoring his mental balance. The purring of cats at night replaced human speech for him and created the illusion of home comfort. He learned to care for other creatures, which helped him not to become completely feral himself. The cats became his only family, army, and companions in this empty world. Having solved his sleep problem, Alexander was able to focus his energies on building a more reliable shelter. He built 2 huts out of pimento wood, covering them with long grass and palm leaves. One hut served as his bedroom and kitchen, while the other was a place for prayer and storage. The division of space was an important psychological technique that imitated civilized life. But even after defeating his minor enemies, Selkirk faced a new problem that could not be solved by taming. His clothes, his only protection from the sun and thorny bushes, began to turn to dust. In the next chapter, you will learn how a rusty nail became the most valuable tool in the world. Want to know a secret that will change your perception of the value of things? When Selkirk's clothes finally rotted away under the influence of the humid climate and constant wear, he faced a serious threat. Walking naked in harsh scrub in the scorching sun meant constant injuries, burns, and insect bites. He had to reinvent the art of tailoring without needles, thread, or fabric. All he had at his disposal were the skins of dead goats and old rusty nails pulled from the boards of a ship's chest. Making a needle was a real engineering feat for a man accustomed to using ready-made tools. Selkirk spent hours grinding the nail against stones, shaping it and sharpening it. It was meditative, painstaking work, where one wrong move could break the blank. When the needle was ready, the question of thread arose as ordinary fibers rotted quickly. He learned to unravel old worn stockings into strong threads, and when they ran out, he began to use thin strips of leather and tendons. This required incredible skill and patience. but the result exceeded expectations. The suit he sewed for himself looked wild, but was perfectly suited to the conditions of the island. The goatskin pants and jacket protected him from thorns while hunting and from the night chill. Fire was another critical resource that had to be maintained at all costs. When Selkirk ran out of tinder and gunpowder for kindling became scarce, he had to learn how to make fire by friction. He used pimento wood, which, as it turned out, was perfect for this purpose. Fire making became a daily ritual that required physical strength and skill. But fire did more than just allow him to cook hot food, which was critical for digestion. It was a symbol of civilization, the center of his small universe, driving away the darkness. The smoke from the fire also served as protection from annoying insects that could carry disease. Selkirk's culinary experiments also deserve special attention. He discovered a local cabbage palm, the tops of which tasted like regular cabbage. It became an excellent source of vitamins and added variety to his meat-based diet. So Alexander Selkirk, a simple sailor, became an engineer, tailor, cook, and leather worker all rolled into one. His wild inventions were the height of rationality and functionality. But while he had his daily life sorted out, time was working against him. Don't forget to like this if you admire human ingenuity. How long do you think it took to turn an ordinary sailor into an Olympic runner? When his gunpowder supplies ran out, Selkirk faced the prospect of starvation. Hunting with a gun was easy, but now he had to catch fast and agile goats with his bare hands or with primitive weapons. It seemed impossible because goats moved easily on rocks that were inaccessible to humans. However, hunger is the best coach, and Selkirk began his forced training. At first, he returned from hunting empty-handed, exhausted and angry, with broken feet. But with each passing week, his body changed. Adapting to the new stresses, the excess weight disappeared, his muscles became steel, and his stamina became endless. He began to run across rough terrain as he had once walked across the deck. The sailor's shoes had long since fallen apart, and after trying to make moccasins out of animal skins, he realized that they only got in the way. The soles of his feet had become so thick that they turned into natural armor. He could run over sharp rocks, branches, and thorns without feeling pain or getting injured. This gave him an incredible advantage in gripping the surface of the rocks. Soon he achieved a level of physical fitness that no civilized man of that time possessed. Selkirk could catch up with a wild goat on the run, grab it by the horns, and knock it to the ground. He became the perfect predator, the top of the food chain on his island. The diary that Selkirk kept, or later recounted, mentions that he killed more than 500 goats during his stay. He caught, marked by cutting their ears, and released just as many. This was not only a way to build up reserves for a rainy day, but also a kind of entertainment, a way to feel power over nature. His speed and agility became legendary. Later, eyewitnesses to his rescue said that he moved with the grace of a wild animal and could outrun a ship's dog. This physical progress was a side effect of survival, turning his body into a perfect machine. In the next chapter, you will learn how the pursuit of another prey led to a disaster that almost put an end to his story. Guess what saved him from certain death when he fell from a height? One day, while chasing a particularly nimble goat, Alexander's instincts failed him. Carried away by the thrill of the hunt, he stopped watching his step, focusing all his attention on his prey. He drove the animal into thick bushes at the edge of a high cliff, confident that the goat had nowhere to go. Selkirk made a decisive leap to grab the animal, but did not notice that the edge of the cliff was hidden by thick vegetation. Together with the goat, he fell from a great height. It was a fall that would have ended in certain death or, at the very least, a broken spine. In the absence of medicine, any serious injury meant a slow and painful death from dehydration and pain. Selkirk flew several dozen meters, hitting ledges and branches. When he came to, the sun was high in the sky, but he couldn't tell how much time had passed. It turned out that he had been unconscious for 3 days, according to other sources, 24 hours, but he had lost all sense of time. His body was covered in bruises, but to his surprise, he found that his bones were intact. He tried to move, and a sharp pain immobilized him. The reason for his miraculous rescue was the very goat he had been chasing. The animal fell beneath him, acting as a living shock absorber, taking the brunt of the impact with the rocks. The goat died instantly, but its death saved the life of its pursuer. It was a grim irony of fate. The prey saved the hunter. Selkirk found himself trapped at the bottom of the ravine, unable not only to get out, but even to stand up. He had to crawl back to his camp, overcoming excruciating pain. The journey, which usually took him half an hour to run, stretched into long hours of agonizing crawling. This incident was a harsh reminder of the fragility of human life. He realized that his physical strength and agility were worthless in the face of chance. After recovering, which took many weeks, he became much more cautious. During his forced inactivity, he read the Bible a lot and reflected. The pain humbled his pride and forced him to reevaluate his attitude toward risk. He realized that survival is not a sprint or a feat, but a marathon of caution. Are you ready for the shocking truth? Selkirk's greatest fear was not wild animals or hunger, but rescue. More precisely, rescue by the wrong people. In those days, the ocean was teeming not only with English privateers, but also with Spanish warships. Spain and England were at war, and for the Spanish, any English sailor in these waters was a pirate and an enemy to be destroyed or sent to penal servitude. During his imprisonment, Selkirk saw sails on the horizon several times. Each time it caused a storm of emotions, hope mixed with horror. He had to accurately determine the nationality of the ship before sending a distress signal. A mistake could cost him his freedom or his life. Once, two ships approached the island and dropped anchor. Selkirk, losing his vigilance in his joy, lit a signal fire and went ashore, waving his arms. But when the boat approached, he heard Spanish being spoken. His joy instantly turned to icy terror. The Spaniards saw him and immediately opened fire. Instead of rescuers, a punitive detachment landed on the shore. Selkirk rushed to run deeper into the island, using all the skills he had acquired during years of solitude. A deadly race began, with his life at stake. The soldiers were armed and numerous, but they did not know the terrain. Selkirk, on the other hand, knew every tree and every ravine. He ran faster than the wind, leading his pursuers into the most impenetrable thickets. However, the Spaniards were persistent and kept up, firing randomly at the bushes. At some point, his strength began to fail him, and he realized that he would not be able to break away. Then he decided to hide not on the ground but in the air. He climbed to the top of a huge tree with a dense crown, literally merging with the foliage. The Spaniards approached the tree and even stopped under it to catch their breath. Selkirk could see their heads and hear their crude jokes and conversations. He prayed that no branch would crack beneath him and that no drops of sweat would fall. The soldiers urinated on the trunk of the tree he was sitting on, unaware that their target was right above their heads. Loneliness is a mirror that you cannot look into for too long without seeing a monster there. Once his daily routine was established and the threat of starvation receded, Selkirk's main enemy became silence. Humans are social animals, and our brains require communication to function normally. Deprived of conversation, Selkirk began to feel his self dissolving into the surrounding landscape. To keep himself from going mad, he imposed strict discipline on his mental activity. Reading the Bible became not just a religious act, but an exercise for the mind. He read aloud, trying to pronounce each word clearly so as not to forget the sound of English speech. The text of Scripture was the only complex intellectual material available to him. He sang psalms and his voice carried across the valleys of the island, scaring the birds. Singing helped him vent his emotions and fill the frightening emptiness with sound. It was proof that he still existed, that he was still a human being capable of creating, even if only sounds. However, over time, he noticed that his speech began to change. He began to forget words, confuse endings, and his language became increasingly primitive. Thoughts that he could not express aloud became vague and fragmented. He began to think in images rather than sentences. In his memories, he often returned to his native Scotland, to the village of Largo. He mentally talked to his parents, with whom he had quarreled before leaving, asking them for forgiveness. It was an endless repentance that lasted for years. He rethought his entire past life, realizing how petty his grievances and ambitions had been. Selkirk admitted that he had never been as good a Christian as he was on this island. Loneliness cleansed him of the superficial, leaving only the essence. He found peace in his soul, ceasing to fight with himself and his past. But there were also moments of dark melancholy when he sat motionless for hours, staring at the ocean. At such moments, he felt like the only person in the universe, the last survivor after the end of the world. Tears flowed down his wild face, but they were tears not of despair, but of humility. On February 1st, 1709, sails appeared on the horizon again. This time, they were two English privateers, the Duke and the Duchess, commanded by Woodes Rogers. The most surprising coincidence was that the navigator on one of them was William Dampier, the very man under whose command Selkirk had embarked on his fateful voyage. Dampier knew Selkirk and could confirm his identity. Selkirk, seeing the English flags, lit a huge signal fire. This time he had no doubts and did not hide. The fire was spotted and a boat was lowered from the ships. The sailors approached the shore cautiously, fearing a Spanish ambush. When they landed, a strange sight met their eyes. They were greeted by a man dressed from head to toe in goatskins, bearded and wild in appearance. He tried to say something, but his speech was incoherent. He had half forgotten the language and uttered words, breaking them off mid-sentence. Selkirk was so overwhelmed with emotion that he could not even drink the rum his rescuers offered him. The taste of alcohol, which he had missed so much at first, now seemed disgusting to him. He had lost all connection to the world of men, except for the desire to be among them. Dampier immediately recognized his former subordinate and gave him a glowing recommendation to Captain Rogers. He called Selkirk the best sailor he knew, and that sealed the recluse's fate. Instead of becoming a mere passenger, Selkirk was immediately given the position of first mate. His physical condition impressed the crew. He was stronger and more resilient than any sailor on the ship. Selkirk climbed the mast with ease and performed heavy work, while the crew suffered from scurvy and weakness after a long voyage. Selkirk returned to England in 1711 a rich man. His share of the captured booty was 800 pounds, a huge sum at the time, equivalent to hundreds of thousands of dollars today. It would seem that this was a happy ending. He survived, became rich, and returned home a hero. But reality turned out to be much more prosaic and sadder than literary endings. London welcomed him as an exotic curiosity. His story became a sensation. Newspapers wrote about him, and he was invited to pubs to listen to stories about life on the island. At first he was flattered, but very soon the attention began to weigh on him. The noise, dirt, hypocrisy, and vanity of the city repelled him. He could not get used to sleeping in a soft bed and the stuffy air of the rooms. Selkirk often left home and wandered the streets or forests, trying to find the feeling of freedom he had on the island. He told his friends, "I now have 800 pounds, but I will never be as happy as I was when I didn't have a penny." In his native Largo, he became a local legend, but even there he found no peace. To hide from people, he dug a cave in the garden of his parents' house and spent whole days there looking at the sea. It was a pitiful attempt to recreate his lost paradise, his island of safety in the midst of a sea of people. He was never able to fully fit into society. His strange habits, introversion, and outbursts of aggression scared people away. He got married, but family life did not bring him peace. The call of the sea and solitude was too strong. It was during this period that journalist and writer Daniel Defoe became interested in his story. They met in a pub, and Selkirk gave him his diaries or simply told him his story. Defoe, being a talented writer, took the facts but completely changed the essence. Selkirk's return to the Navy was not a pursuit of profit, but an escape from life on land. In 1720, he joined the royal ship Weymouth as a lieutenant. He was no longer the bold young man rebelling against the captain, but a stern, experienced officer who knew the value of discipline in life. Service in His Majesty's Navy was different from the freedom of piracy. Strict order reigned here, but the living conditions of the sailors remained terrible. Ships were breeding grounds for disease, especially in tropical waters. The Weymouth was sent to the coast of West Africa to fight pirates. The fate that had kept him on an island among rocks and wild goats turned away from him in the cramped cabin of the ship. The crew began to fall victim to yellow fever, a terrible disease against which Selkirk had neither immunity nor medicine. His hardened body, which had endured years of deprivation and falls from heights, could not cope with the microscopic virus. Alexander Selkirk died on December 13, 1721. He was only 45 years old. He died as he had lived most of his life, surrounded by the ocean. According to maritime custom, his body was wrapped in sailcloth, a cannonball was tied to his feet, and he was thrown overboard off the coast of Africa. The sea, which he loved and hated, became his final resting place. There was no grave left to bring flowers to. Only the salty waves and an entry in the ship's log. North-northwest, Alexander Selkirk, lieutenant, died. His death went virtually unnoticed amid the success of Defoe's novel. The world had already fallen in love with the fictional Robinson Crusoe and forgotten the real man whose drama served as the basis for the book. The literary character turned out to be more alive than his prototype. Alexander Selkirk conquered the island but lost to civilization. His story makes us wonder, what does a person really need to be happy? We surround ourselves with things, gadgets, and noise, afraid to be alone with ourselves, while a simple Scottish sailor found peace in his soul with only a Bible, goats, and the starry sky above his head. Perhaps true freedom is not the ability to buy whatever you want, but the ability to get by with little and not depend on anyone. What would you take with you to a desert island if you could only choose 3 items? Suggest your options in the comments, and let's discuss whose survival strategy would be the most effective. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss new stories about people who have challenged fate.